love the voices and visionaries shared here on Conscious Shift with Julianne Turner, from spiritual guides like Marianne Williamson, Barbara Marks Hubbard, and Don Miguel Ruiz, to creative sparks like Julia Cameron of The Artist's Way, and inspiring business gurus like Seth Godin and Daniel Pink. Then you'll love being able to grasp their wise guidance and apply their step-by-step wisdom to the new Conscious Shift Notes Action Guide series, a version of Cliff Notes for each Conscious Shift show. With Conscious Shift Notes, they not only give you the engaging full audio interviews from each Conscious Shift visionary and the full written transcript, but now they've also taken each Conscious Shift show interview and distilled it down to its essential essence. So you get each Conscious Shift show summarized on just a few colorful visual pages with bullet points, highlights, and key quotes, so you can grasp the key points at one glance. Want to know the best news? Conscious Shift host Julianne Turner wants you to experience the inspiration of their new Conscious Shift Notes absolutely free for a limited time. With her free gift of their first Conscious Shift Notes Action Guide and audio series with Seth Godin, go to ConsciousShiftShow.com to receive your free gift now. In your free gift Conscious Shift Notes set, multiple New York Times bestselling author and creative visionary Seth Godin shares in detail exactly how you can discover and profit from your own unique genius and start doing what really matters to you and to the world. Your first step is to go to ConsciousShiftShow.com right now to receive your free Conscious Shift Notes, Action Guide, and audio, along with their Conscious Shift Show updates from their growing global community of fellow visionaries. Most important, you'll also get to see how you can access all their Conscious Shift Show wisdom in their brand new Conscious Shift Notes collections around transformational topics they've shared, like prosperity, life purpose, creativity at work, transformational leadership, and many more. In fact, their first Conscious Shift Show Notes collection on prosperity is available now and includes Marianne Williamson on Law of Divine Compensation, Julia Cameron on A Prosperous Heart, Dan Pink on To Sell is Human, and Adam Grant on Give and Take, How True Leadership Starts with a Giving Mindset, and much more. Go to ConsciousShiftShow.com right now to claim your Conscious Shift Notes, Action Guide, and audios to guide you step by step to make your own conscious shift into your true greatness today.
Welcome, Conscious Shifters. This is Julianne Turner. So glad to have you with us on the show today. And just want to remind you that you can get reminders about the show, previews of who is going to be coming and sharing wisdom on our show, and also get a wonderful gift about sharing your genius at ConsciousShiftShow.com. That's ConsciousShiftShow.com. It's all free, and just a thank you for being one of our listeners. So today I am wanting to ask you, first of all, what comes to mind when I say the word aging? Now, what about when I say peak performance aging? Does it sound like a contradiction? Does it sound like an oxymoron? After all, isn't aging supposed to be about the decline of our mental and physical abilities, the opposite of peak performance? Well, our Conscious Shift guest today, Stephen Kotler, is going to reveal the latest research and his own daredevil experiment of taking on acrobatic park skiing at age 53 to prove that peak performance is indeed poised to potentially reverse our view of aging. Welcome, Stephen, to Conscious Shift.
Thank you. It's great to be with you again.
It's great to have you as well. So a quick bit of context here, which our regular conscious shifters will recognize. Stephen is the author of a series of bestsellers and instant classics on peak performance and creative flow. And he is also the founder of the Flow Research Collective, which researches the science of creative flow. And Stephen is, I would say, one of, if not the top expert leading in the field of peak performance and flow. So his latest book, NYTimes Country, Growing Old and Staying Rad, is going to help us explore peak performance aging. So let's start, Stephen, with just a quick little snapshot of how peak performance relates to flow, and let's just kind of set that up as we start.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's define terms, actually. Let's define 3 terms that'll help set this up. Peak performance aging, and flow. So peak performance, and this is the definition we use at the Flow Research Collective, right? And our work is, as you pointed out, we study the neurobiology, peak human performance. So what goes on in the brain and the body when people are performing at their best. We define peak performance literally as nothing fancier than getting your biology to work for you rather than against you, right? Peak performance aging then is getting your biology to work for you rather than against you when applied to the challenges and opportunities of aging, the second half of our lives. Flow sits at the heart of this conversation. Now, flow is a technical term, it's a scientific term, and it is technically defined as an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and we perform our best, right? More specifically, it's any of those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. You get so focused on what you're doing, everything else just disappears, and all aspects of performance, mental and physical, go through the roof. That's flow. Flow plays a huge role in peak performance aging. So I'm going to give you 3 high-level things, then we can go into much deeper stuff as we go along the way. But the 3 things you should know, for starters, is 1, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, who coined the term flow, did all the initial research on flow. Everybody knows him from his book Flow, and maybe they read Creativity or Good Business. He wrote 7 books on adult development because flow, turns out, is the engine, or one of the main engines, of adult development. So how do we grow up? How do we become adults? Flow is at the center of this. Why is that? Quick shorthand. On the other side of a flow state, learning increases in flow. So we're more adaptable. We've learned something. Our skills have increased. We're moved along the path to mastery. We also gain empathy and wisdom. And wisdom is a distinct neurobiological trait. We know where it is in the brain. Sort of think of it as like emotional intelligence writ large is really what you would think of as so. Flow is the engine of adult development. It's how we grow up, and it's directly related to aging, right? A couple other things you need to know about flow and aging in general. So there are 9 known causes of aging. What do they all have in common? They have one thing in common, which is they all link back to stress and inflammation. So anything that fights inflammation is a really potent anti-aging tool. And as we move into flow, for a bunch of different neurobiological reasons, all the stress hormones get flushed out of our system. It actually resets the nervous system back to 0, which is like almost a total rebirth of the nervous system, much more powerful than you can get elsewhere. So this, among other things, has very potent peak performance, right? Because less stress, better performance, and anti-aging benefits. Yeah. And finally, flow, as you probably talked about on this show a bunch, it's the best we get to feel on the planet, right? It's our favorite feeling. It is baked into the definition of happiness and the best we get to feel on the planet, and meaning, purpose, passion, well-being, all these things have flow at their center. So whenever we experience enormously positive emotions, which flow is at the center of, it amplifies the production of T cells, which fight, right? These are immune cells, right? They fight disease. More importantly, natural killer cells. These target tumors and cytolytic cells and other major causes of aging. So you have flow is peak performance, and there's a whole bunch of peak performance ramifications around it, but it is a very, very, very potent sort of anti-aging device. And because flow is ubiquitous in humans, meaning we can all get into it, right? Everybody listening to me can get into flow. It's how humans are wired to do peak performance. It is an incredibly powerful anti-aging tool at all of our disposal. It's not the only one. It's not the full picture, but you asked how these things link up and how, in a sense, how did I end up in this conversation? What am I doing talking about peak performance aging? There's a bunch of different reasons, but flow sits at the heart of it. And in fact, most of the subfields that I had to get a lot of knowledge in to get good at flow. Also, when you talk about peak performance aging, you're talking about 12 or 13 fields coming together in the past 5 years to form a new discipline. A lot of the disciplines are either disciplines that I've been working in for a long time. For example, longevity science. I run a dog rescue. We do hospice care and special needs care and have for 20 years, right? And it's a big operation. And so we use a lot of these same techniques that are crossing over into humans with dogs with tremendous success. So there's stuff like that, but as a general rule, most everything sort of folded into flow. And that's how I ended up in the peak performance aging discussion.
That's amazing. And we'll no, that's such a beautiful symphony of weaving those terms together and really clearly. Now, what we can literally feel is hope about our later years that we may not have been able to feel. We can feel that there's potential for greater performance, greater mental and physical performance as we age. What you have shared too is that given this breakthrough research on all these 13, intersecting, overlapping, integrated fields, is that they really defy our mindsets about our potential as we age. You say peak performance has no age limit. So one of the keys that I noted, Stephen, that we want to share with our audience today is you have really distilled this down to saying age is a mental event as much as a physical process. So the way we think, our mindset about aging actually is kind of a self-determining, self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. So how do we get the right mindset toward aging? Because as you say, your research shows it can actually, if we have the right mindset, it can add up to 7.5 years to our lives.
So it's a great question. Let's start big picture and then get a little more specific. So big picture. So you mentioned at the top of the show, the traditional mindset around aging, right? I like to call that the long, slow rot theory. And it's the idea that all of our mental skills and all of our physical skills decline over time. And there's nothing we can do to stop this slide. Now, this was the dominant theory of aging in the 20th century. If you're over, probably if you're over the age of 35, this is what you grew up under. And this is probably what you believe or some part of what you believe. If you're younger than 35, I'm not entirely sure what the full story is that you have. You probably have bits and pieces of the news story and the old story, but here's the news story. And this is essentially research into aging that we would think of as modern. It starts almost back with Freud, right? Freud starts looking at it, says, oh no, old people, the brain stops developing, they can't learn, we've got all these problems. That's sort of where it actually starts emerging. And by the end of the 20th century, we proved him right. We know every single thing that's going to rot inside the brain and the body. And then in the mid-90s, we start getting a bunch of new data. And some of it is that there were these older studies that started in the 70s that looked at like 20 years of data, and first rounds were completed in the 90s. So we started getting longitudinal data. The Harvard Adult Development Project, that was a 100-year study of adult development. We started to get real data around in the 90s. People had been 50 years or 60 years had gone by. And so data started coming in, et cetera. What we now know is that the older idea, it's not entirely wrong, but it's totally misguided. It's not entirely wrong. And here's what I mean. While all of those skills do decline over time, and don't kid yourself, especially once you get to 50, if you're not moving forward, you're going backwards. But what we now know is that everything we used to think that declines over time, everything is a very big word. So let's say 95% of what we know declined over time, we now know are all use it or lose it skills.
Right. So
if we never stop training them, we get to hang on to them, even advance them much later in life than anybody thought possible. There's 5 to 10% remaining stuff where we know stuff is going wrong. We don't quite know how to fix it yet. And there are sort of interesting ideas being developed along the way. But it's probably going to turn out that everything is a use it or lose it skill. And it's really about figuring out how to train the skill. That's been a lot of it. A lot of the puzzle is like, we know cognitive decline happens, the mental acuity, and there's like 11 different things that fold into cognitive decline. And there are now ways to train each and every one of them. So it took a while to get to that point, but we've gotten to that point. So big picture, so much more is possible in the second half of our life. People always want to say, okay, well, what do I do? How do I unlock that? Where do I start? And where you got to start is exactly where you started. And this was with mindset. So the data is really interesting. This is some of that old research. It started with a brilliant woman who you may have had on the show before, Ellen Langer. She was at Harvard. And Ellen started working on questions of language and aging and things like that back in the 70s. And this work got passed down to a lot of people, including Becca Levy, who's at Yale, who's sort of carried the torch. But anyways, we'll be talking about both their work in a second. They were looking at mindset. Ellen Langer's core topic was mindset, and she started this work. And what they found out, as you pointed out, is that a positive mindset towards aging, which is, I think the second half of my life is just filled with interesting, exciting possibilities, and my best days are ahead of me. That's a positive mindset towards aging. As you pointed out, and actually that 7.5 years was the older number. This new updated number, it's 8 years. You gain 8 years of healthy longevity. So health span and lifespan increase with a positive mindset towards aging. Now, Becca Levy, who I mentioned, she figured out what the inverse is. She looked at ageism, which is the most common stereotype in the world, right? Which is shocking. Julianne, you got to think about it. I walk outside my front door and I display any prejudice, and I'm going to get canceled by the time I get to my mailbox, period. But I can look at you and go, oh, Julianne, you're too old for this shit. And literally everybody laughs. It's funny. But that being exposed to negative stereotypes around aging or having a negative mindset towards aging, this is Becca Levy's work. If you're exposed in your young years, your 30s, your 40s, and your 50s, by the time you get to 60 years old, you're going to exhibit a 30% greater memory decline. That's enormous, right? That's gigantic. That's crazy. So yes, and the thing I want to emphasize here, because it's sort of the uber point that's built on the back end of this, is I can give you peak performance aging in a sentence, which I will. If you want to rock till you drop, you want to regularly engage in challenging, creative, and social activities that demand dynamic, deliberate play, take place in novel outdoor environments. Now, that's a sentence. We'll come back to what parts mean and whatever. But the thing I want you to hear in that sentence is these are all mental, psychological triggers that produce neurobiological reactions. You know what was not in the sentence that I just named? Substances, pharmacology, biohacking, peptides, stem cells, anything owned by a pharmaceutical company, anything that's a supplement. Like, this is stuff. And here's what the emphasis on. We hear a lot about aging and anti-aging, longevity science, and all this stuff these days. And we hear about diets and ice baths and, all this stuff. And I'm not saying that stuff is bad. But what I am saying is that's cutting edge regenerative medicine. And historically, regenerative medicine has been around for 30 years. I've been studying it for 30 years. I've been writing about it for 30 years. It's 10% correct and 90% bunk. So maybe we've gotten better and it's 20% correct and 90, but we don't know for 20 more years. All the stuff that I just put in that sentence, all these psychological triggers with neurobiological reactions, the research into them started in the 50s and 60s. And got really hot in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and which is why we know all this stuff. My point is there's now 50 to 60 to 70 years of data on this stuff. So the things that people are talking about, the buzzwords and all that stuff, I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm saying we've got like 3 to 5 years worth of data and we don't really know. And if you're trying to measure longevity, we won't know for 30 years, right? And so while it's exciting, and I don't want to naysay around it, if you want to be effective today, it's these psychological triggers, and it starts with mindset, because you can't get into the game without a proper mindset towards aging.
That's so powerful, Stephen. And what that tells us is that we all have access to this. right?
Yeah, that's, it's funny. And then I want to hit up this for a second, because I hear so much, and so does everybody these days, about like how longevity is for these billionaires who are blah, blah, blah. And right. Two things I want to point out with. One, everybody should say thank you to those billionaires, because what they are actually doing is running the biggest experiment ever in longevity science on their own bodies for free in public. And we all get to watch and learn. Thank you. I mean, literally, thank you. Okay. Generally, and this stuff gets democratized very cheaply. I'll give you a simple example. In 2015, I had my shoulders rebuilt because of rotator cuff injuries with PRP, plasma, platelet enriched plasma is what that stands for. And it's a type of regenerative medicine. They basically take a bunch of your blood, they spin it in a centrifuge and pull out the platelets, which are rich in stem cells and cytokines and things that fight tears, and they re-inject into the wound site. Very cutting edge in 2015. My mother, who is 80 years old and lives in Ohio and has just general healthcare medical insurance that you would have, you were 80 and you lived in Ohio. She just had PRP done on her shoulder, covered by health. Like, this is how fast this elitist stuff is getting democratized. So like what we're hearing about billionaires and anti-aging, it's all bunk. It's all crap. It's just news hype, and none of it's real. And what is real is people are experimenting on this stuff, and which is great because somebody has to. And it gets once they light onto a solution that works, it gets democratized really fast. So that's all it's what it is. And all the psychological stuff, which are the big triggers, they're already available to all of us. Absolutely. So literally for everybody, the news is fantastic.
It is. So we're going to talk about experimenting with your own physical self here in a moment. What I want to reference just briefly and make sure our listeners are aware of is that your landmark book on flow, The Art of Impossible, is the handbook for how do we access all of this. Just so extraordinarily well researched, as all your books are, and it's so well laid out so that we can actually activate these mental and physical triggers for flow and peak performance. So I just want to inject that in there.
And I also want to say that the book we're talking about, NAR Country, in my mind, they're companion books. And here's why. They're very different books. NAR Country is essentially an adventure story, which covers this crazy experiment I ran myself and some friends of mine on peak performance aging, right? We took all this stuff we've been talking about, put it in a learning protocol, and I tried to learn something incredibly difficult in my 50s to test this stuff. And that's the story in NAR Country. But here's what the other reason I wrote NAR Country. And it was, so at the Flow Research Collective, as you know, we train people. We work in 130 countries. We train tens of thousands of people every month. We're very successful. We're very good at this. But the one thing that is been this constant problem with our clients is how you apply these ideas on a day-to-day basis is always a bit of a mystery. And there's been no good, you can't point to anything in the world and say, oh, this is how it works on a day-to-day basis. So all the ideas, all the science, is all laid out in Art of Impossible. In Our Country is what it looks like when it's applied.
That's right.
Right. That's what I did. And, if you think the book is successful, nobody's done this before, basically, because one, you have to have the expertise in peak performance, and two, you have to have some writing chops, because NAR Country is essentially it's a ski diary, right? Exactly. And if that goes wrong, it's an overshare with too much skiing, right? Like people love the book because it's not, but like it could have been terribly boring and all that stuff. So it was actually a very complicated book to write from a writing perspective to make it not boring and fun and always useful and different and all that stuff. But it's really a book about applied peak performance. I'm applying peak performance to the challenges of aging, but it's applied peak performance. And it was the thing I could have done in Art of Impossible. Nobody would have read it because the book would have been 1,000 pages long, right? So I had to split it into two books so that anybody who might want to read it and change the style a little bit so it's more fun.
It is fun, and it's kind of an experimental journal and exciting handbook on how this peak performance flow science can actually be interwoven into our lives in a very exciting, extreme way. So Stephen, let's talk about how you share in NAR country your experiment of park skiing, because I want to make sure all of our listeners actually, for those not aware, like this is like acrobatic skiing that normally only people under 35 ever attempt, and you attempted it at 53.
Yeah, so it was everything I sort of talked about, all those use it or lose it skills. We knew this on paper. We knew this in the lab, but we knew it individually, one skill at a time. And while Ellen Langer, who I mentioned before, has run some very cool peak performance aging in the wild experiments, it had been a long time. And she did very sort of specific ones that are amazing, but nobody had tried a big one. So I took all of these ideas, combined it into a learning protocol and said, hey, can I use this to learn something that, is supposed to be impossible for somebody, as you pointed out, over the age of 35 or 40, which was park skiing. And park skiing, if you've seen the Olympics, you do tricks off jumps and on rails and boxes and wall rides. It's very acrobatic. It's very dangerous. And for about 11 different reasons, it's considered impossible for anybody. Well, very difficult over the age of 35. 40, it's impossible. 45, it's impossible. And by 50, they just think you're crazy, right?
Exactly.
Like, you've moved past impossible. You're just into nuts. Like, what are you doing? Which is really funny because I'll be in the terrain park these days and I'll be beating myself up, and I'll be with friends of mine and I'll be like, Stephen, perspective, look around the terrain park. You are 30 years older than everybody in sight. And I'm like, oh, okay, fair point. But what we combined it into this learning protocol, and to measure progress, I made a list of tricks that was basically 0 to intermediate. I had no skills. I could ski, but I had no park skiing skills. I'd never really been in a terrain park where I started this. And I figured, honestly, if it took me 5 years, well, that'd be cool, right? Like, I'd still know how to park ski. I'd be almost 60 years old, but okay, cool, whatever. There were a lot, I'm busy, a busy schedule. I'm a bad athlete in general. Even though I've been a lifelong athlete, I'm not a naturally gifted athlete, and I've been around actual natural athletes. I'm not one of them. And I've injured myself a lot. I've got a pretty broken body. So a lot of the, any challenges, I was up against a lot of stuff, right? And almost, I think I'm the only person who's betting on myself. And I just know my track record. So I was everybody else, even my ski partner who's in the book, Ryan, who, he thought I was nuts. He thought maybe I'd get like half of the tricks on the list in 5 years or whatever. But I ended up learning everything in a single season. I've never learned anything so fast in my life. So the protocol that we designed for peak performance aging and peak performance learning and all this stuff, like, it didn't just work well. I mean, like, it worked better than anything I've ever seen. And Ryan, who I mentioned before, so Ryan was a former sponsored athlete, a park skier, and then retired, got injured, had a family, had a career, and is 20 years younger than me. He came back to it in his mid-30s, used the same protocol, and he got farther in a single season than he'd ever gone, which is when we went, oh, wow, maybe this works. Maybe this is real, right? But 2 people are a really sexy pilot study. We didn't know for sure. So we went back the following year with 17 older adults, ages 30 to 70, and with the same learning protocol. And mind you, so both Ryan and I were expert skiers, right? Even though we had never been in the train, or I hadn't been in the terrain park, we took intermediate and skiers and snowboarders in this next round, so just like average people, to see if they could. And in 4 sessions on the hill, we got them park skiing, park snowboarding. So the learning protocol was deadly effective. And in fact, to take it one step further, though this is not in the book, we turned it into a class, not aimed at teaching people how to park ski. We stripped out the action sports because not everybody's going to want to learn to park ski, and said, look, what we have to do is see if we can radically shift your mindset around aging for all the reasons, and 2, design what we call a NAR style quest. For me, that was learning to park ski, right? You asked at the front of the show, how do you change your mindset? Meditation and mindfulness will help. Watching your language will help. But truly the best way to change your mindset, pick a challenge that you think is impossible for yourself, wherever you are, and go after it. And prove to yourself that it's wrong, that you're wrong. That's, I mean, like, you'll shatter your mindset. That was whatever linger. And, you know, I look, I've done all the research, but I still like the long growth, slow rot theory of aging. Is like every time you're 50 years old, you tear a muscle, you get this, oh my God, is this the last time? Is this the beginning of the end? Right. Even me knowing all this stuff. So I had to find a NAR stock was to totally explode my old mindset. So we've now put over 400 people through this class, and I've seen everything from like men and women in their 60s taking on all kinds of crazy athletic challenges, from I'm going to run a Ironman, I'm going to run a triathlon, I'm going to learn how to kite surf, I'm going to learn how to roller, anything you're going to rock climb on and on. But some of them are just really cool challenges. There's a woman in Japan who's very, very, very shy, and she's been an artist her entire life. She's decided in her 60s, she's going to have her first solo show. So like, this is this thing, right? So you want something that like really, I had unfinished business in skiing. That was one of the reasons it was good. It was a good choice. You need a lot of motivation for this kind of stuff. It's not easy. And I just had unfinished business. It was a really good place. I had all like my intrinsic motivators that I talk about it in Art and Puzzle, and then I had some extra fire, right? And I also like proving people wrong. So it was really fun when in the beginning, when I started this, and everybody was just like, you're out of your freaking mind, you're insane. And, you know, it's funny, at the end of the book, I was laughing because we bump into Jeremy Jones at Mount Hood. Jeremy Jones is a very famous snowboarder. I've known Jeremy forever because we're both Tahoe locals. And he was like, what are you doing up at Hood? And I was like, well, I'm trying to learn how to park ride. And he's like, why? In God's name. He's like, wait, don't tell me this is another one of your crazy experiments. And I just started laughing. I was like, Jeremy, you know me really well. He's like, well, just tell me, how many bones have you broken so far? And this is like a guy who's known me for a long time, and a friend. And like, this is just everybody. And I didn't break any, right? Obviously, it was part of it, but nobody really thought it was possible. I didn't really know it was possible. But now, you know, 5 years in, I've learned those 20 tricks and plenty more, and I'm starting to polish my act, and I'm getting better, and, you know, I'm still progressing, and I'm literally going skiing tomorrow because there's still some snow out west and the terrain parks are open, and, you know, so I'm still progressing, and now I'm 56. So it's 3 years later, and it's, you know, it's still going. And all the people we taught how to park ski, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, I ski with a lot of them. So they're still progressing, which is cool.
Very cool. All of that is just so cool and astounding and so hopeful. One
last thing, just so everybody doesn't have to take my word for any of this. So if you go to narcountry.com, which is the website for the book, there's right there on the landing page, it'll say there's 2 videos. One, introduction to park skiing. So if you've never seen park skiing before, watch that, because it'll give you an idea of what the hell we're doing and talking about. Second video is when we did our experiment with the older adults. One of the ways they measure they judge freestyle skiing competitions with a standard criteria. We had a filmmaker follow us around and record everything, and we put together an independent panel of judges and assessed everybody's progress. And I can tell you, by the way, because of that, I know they made 26.5% progress from the first class to the 4th class, right? Which is huge, considering you're dealing with older adults who had never done this before. That's a huge amount of progress for a skill that, like, you know, most people aren't supposed to be able to get at each, you know, at 29, even at the low end of our study group. So there's a video there, which is really, I hate to say it, Julianne, because it's the weirdest thing ever. I made something cute. It's adorable. It's adorable. You get to watch a bunch of old people kicking ass in the terrain park, and it's unbelievably adorable. And I can't believe I made something cute, but I did. And any of you can go there and watch it and check it out.
That's amazing. So we're going to talk more about how you're going to be able to get in touch with Stephen in our next segment. But NAR Country, just so you know, I want to spell NAR, GNAR Country, COUNTRY, narcountry.com is what Stephen is saying. And that's also the name of his latest book, The Application of Peak Performance and Flow Science. We're going to take a very brief break here, and then we're going to come back and talk about, you know, some of the things that inspired Stephen on this quest, and a little bit more about you finding your own NAR style quest. This is Julianne Turner. You're listening to Conscious Shift.
If you love the voices and visionaries shared here on Conscious Shift with Julianne Turner, from spiritual guides like Marianne Williamson, Barbara Marks Hubbard, and Don Miguel Ruiz, to creative sparks like Julia Cameron of The Artist's Way, and inspiring business gurus like Seth Godin and Daniel Pink, then you'll love being able to grasp their wise guidance and apply their step-by-step wisdom to the new Conscious Shift Notes Action Guide series, a version of Cliff Notes for each Conscious Shift show. With Conscious Shift Notes, they not only give you the engaging full audio interviews from each Conscious Shift visionary and the full written transcript, but now they've also taken each Conscious Shift show interview and distilled it down to its essential essence. So you get each Conscious Shift show summarized on just a few colorful visual pages with bullet points, highlights, and key quotes, so you can grasp the key points at one glance. Want to know the best news? Conscious Shift host Julianne Turner wants you to experience the inspiration of their new Conscious Shift Notes absolutely free for a limited time. With her free gift of their first Conscious Shift Notes Action Guide and audio series with Seth Godin, go to ConsciousShiftShow.com to receive your free gift now. In your free gift Conscious Shift Notes set, multiple New York Times bestselling author and creative visionary Seth Godin shares in detail exactly how you can discover and profit from your own unique genius and start doing what really matters to you and to the world. Your first step is to go to ConsciousShiftShow.com right now to receive your free Conscious Shift Notes, Action Guide, and audio, along with their Conscious Shift Show updates from their growing global community of fellow visionaries. Most important, you'll also get to see how you can access all their Conscious Shift Show wisdom in their brand new Conscious Shift Notes collections around transformational topics they've shared, like prosperity, life purpose, creativity at work, transformational leadership, and many more. In fact, their first Conscious Shift Show Notes collection on prosperity is available now and includes Marianne Williamson on Law of Divine Compensation, Julia Cameron on A Prosperous Heart, Dan Pink on To Sell is Human, and Adam Grant on Give and Take, How True Leadership Starts with a Giving Mindset, and much more. Go to ConsciousShiftShow.com right now to claim your Conscious Shift Notes, Action Guide, and audios to guide you step by step to make your own conscious shift into your true greatness today.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Julianne Turner. You are listening to Conscious Shift, and we are talking to peak performance and flow aficionado and expert Stephen Kotler, the founder of the Flow Research Collective and also the author of NAR Country, which is Growing Old and Staying Rad. I love the name of this book, by the way. What inspired you? Like, let's talk about that word NAR. It's GNAR. Tell us what that means.
So NAR is action sports slang, right? And it's action sports slang. Action sports slang, like, it's amazingly colorful, right? It's really fun and funny. It sounds like another language. It sounds really silly. But action sport athletes are actually very, very literal. And these terms have very precise meanings, and action sports are dangerous. So the meanings are meant to keep you safe. So the words are colorful. But one of the reasons I think they're so colorful is like they're funny, and they're funny because action sport athletes don't want to know exactly what it is that they're about to do. Like that, you need the euphemisms. But NAR is short for it's short for gnarly, which technically in action sports slang means any environment that is high in perceived risk and high in actual risk. Now, I thought that was a fabulous description of our later years. Right, high in perceived risk, high in actual risk. Country is obviously any landscape or domain or territory. And I just thought this was a great description of our later years, but it was also, once you sort of get under the hood and understand a little bit about peak performance aging and what's possible, it's a really great description of the gritty mindset you need to thrive in those later years, right? We talked about before the break how you want to get on what I was calling a NAR style quest, a way of proving to yourself that, you know, whatever your old mindset toward aging has sort of been exploded. And that takes some grit, right? That takes some leaning in and some, I'm gonna get up for the challenge. And so I just thought it was a great description of peak performance aging in our later years and what might be possible.
Yeah, it's such a cool name. And you know, the action sports approach that you touched on, you know, that kind of focus that started your own personal physical experiment into park skiing, and that you've really studied all your life around flow. Action sports are one of the key places where you can see that effect really make a dramatic difference, just like you did with your experiments then with the groups that followed on, taking your learning protocol that you used to learn to park ski in record time and at an amazing level. You brought other people into that. It doesn't have to be action sports. That's just one area. There are some flow triggers that are applicable to any kind of parts of our quest for our life. As you said, there was one woman who was going to do her own show, you know, and drew on all of these flow triggers. Now, one of the things that inspired you that you talk about in NAR Country is the story of Antonio Stradivarius. And so I would love for you just to give that vignette. It's really amazing.
It's a cool, so this is what started me down the road to discovering that almost all of the skills that we thought declined over time are use it or lose it skills. And it started, I don't know how long ago it was. It was maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago. I was actually going to write a mystery book. I wanted to write a story about a cat burglar. And there was a flow tie-in. Six Set Me High had done this cool work saying that juvenile delinquency is actually teenagers using crime, moral transgression, you know, the basic like graffiti art, fighting, shoplifting, the things teenagers do. He's like, no, this isn't about them going bad. It's about them using crime to seek flow as a way of like tuning their nervous system. And there's been really cool work done on that. And I wanted to write this mystery about a cat burglar who, right. But what was she going to steal? She had to steal something cool. And so I was like, oh, maybe rare musical instruments. I'd never heard of a cat burglar in fiction who steals instruments. That's cool. And it leads to the next question, which are, well, what are the rarest musical instruments in history? And I start researching this question. And it turns out 50 to 60% of the rarest musical instruments in history are made by Antonio Stradivarius, one guy, which is bizarre. Imagine if I came to you and said, Julianne, 50% of the most famous paintings in the history of painting have been painted by this one painter, right? Or 50% of the most famous books. It doesn't make any sense, right? And then I learned something even stranger, which is Stradivarius made a couple of his most famous instruments and the best sounding ones in his 90s, at age 92 and 93. And at that moment, I was like, well, wait a minute. Like, that can't be possible. Fast twitch muscle response declines over time. Motor skill performance declines over time. Memory declines over time. Like, all these things should be gone. How the hell is that possible? So I never ended up writing the book. I got obsessed over this question of like, what is going on here? Because the other thing was this, This was 400 years ago, right? This is the late 1600s. So it's not like we've got modern medicine. It's not, right? So I figured if either Stradivarius is in 1 in a 10 billion, which I didn't believe, that didn't make any sense to me, or the other side, everything we know about aging had to be wrong. It was one or the other, right? Like, and that was where, a lot of this started to get more serious, because I was just, it was puzzled. It was just absolutely bizarre to me, and I didn't quite get it. And I was already, because of the work with dogs and because Flo is in the middle of this conversation anyways, I was already, and the regenerative medicine stuff I've been studying and writing about, I was surrounded by all these fields anyways. And I was like, okay, here's a really weird ass puzzle. And so that's what I set out to solve in the beginning. And that was one of the ways that I got inspired.
That is inspiring. And I know that there are so many creators out there, even painters, who painted their masterpieces in their later years. And we can actually probably, in your research, you could probably trace back, flow triggers to their work as well. What a great inspiration. Now, as we age, there are brain changes. And when we think about that, again, from kind of our mindsets or how we've been taught, we might think negative brain changes. But what you bring out in NAR country is that there are actually pretty extraordinary positive brain changes as we age. Could you touch on that?
Yeah, for sure. So you credit where credit is due. Gene Cohn, the late Gene Cohn, who was really the first head of the National Institute for Aging. He was the one who proposed it and created it. And he did a lot of this foundational work, though other people has contributed as well. But as you pointed out, we used to believe, right, there are negative changes in the brain over time. And what he discovered in sort of synthesized and brought together is that as we enter our 50s, there are actually really powerful beneficial changes in the brain. A couple things happen. One, two sides of the brain start working together like never before. Most of the time, the right and the left side of the brain, the two hemispheres work in opposition. It's not entirely true. The left is particular about details. The right is the big picture, but there's opposition there. And as we enter our 50s, if we get it right, and it's not automatic, if we do the right things to unlock this stuff, we get access to whole new levels of intelligence, wisdom, empathy, and creativity. And by the way, this is heavy stuff. So when you talk about intelligence, you get multi-perspectival thinking, which is the ability to see subjects from multiple perspectives. You lose relativistic thinking, which is this idea that things are black and white, right? And that we figure out that black and white is a folly youth, and really in adulthood, everything's a shade of gray, right? And then the brain also starts to recruit underutilized regions, right? So say there's a part of your temporal lobe, because you never learn to play a music instrument that's available, right? So you start learning other things, you start using parts of it, or the brain will start backing up, making redundant copies of other parts in these new areas. So all this stuff starts happening in our 50s. And when we talk about creativity, even, this is cool. So this isn't just creativity, it's divergent thinking. It's outside the box. It's the far-flung connections, which, as a guy who spent 25 years training people to be more creative, it's the hardest thing to train people in. Like, it's really difficult to train people to think divergently. You can do it. It takes a very long period of time to do it. And yet it starts to happen naturally in our 50s. So this is amazing. This was one of the other things that I knew was working for me in my NAR Country Quest. I knew about these changes. And in fact, I want to tell you a great story. It's the best story that should have been in NAR Country that's not, because it was too far afield, but it's about a really good friend of mine, Rebecca Rausch, who is the most famous mountain biker in history. They call her the Queen of Pain. She's like a 7-time world champion mountain biker. And she's actually won like world championships in 11 or 12 different sports. It's crazy, like from adventure racing to orienteering to sport, things you didn't even know were sports, including, so at age 54, maybe she was 52, 53, or 54. So I don't want to add years to the tally, but anyways, Rebecca won the human powered Iditarod. which is right. Yeah, Iditarod in Alaska, one of those grueling races ever. And there's a human powered version where you carry your own shit across Alaska in the dead of winter, right? It's heavy. And it's a really serious race. It's one of, if not the most grueling adventure race in the world. And she won. And the story made her age. The newspapers and the press attention was incredible, but they made her age the story. Rebecca Rausch wins Iditarod despite being in her 50s, despite being in her over and over and over again. And she called me after we were talking about it. I call that getting geezered. It's when people get there, like, you're too old for this crap, juice all over you. That's getting geezered, right? And so Rebecca calls me up and she's like, I got geezered. I was like, oh my God, did you ever? You got headlines, like you got really geezered. And what she said to me, which was so true, and this was my exact experience park skiing, was everybody said I won despite being in my 50s. She said, no, I won because I was in my 50s. If I would have tried this in my 40s, I was not wise enough. I would have died. I literally would have died on the trail in Alaska. And that was how I felt with learning how to park ski. I was like, God, if I would have tried this in my 30s, without the wisdom I have now, I would have put myself in the hospital for good. It would have been a really bad thing. And so I just think that's a great story. It just didn't end up in the book because it was too far afield from what I was doing, but it should have.
That's such a great story. And there are so many great stories in NAR country. I want to circle back as we wrap up to mindset. What you've heard through Stephen's sharing today and that you'll read in NAR country is that this is so transformationally hopeful for all of us. And it is a use it or lose it kind of proposition. The idea that you could identify a NAR style quest that's meaningful to you. So you get that little extra juice motivation that Stephen's talking about. But the first key, the biggest key, is to change the mindset around aging. And Stephen's work is helping us do that. As he says, aging is a fact of life, but old is a mindset. So Stephen, tell us where we can find you. And we talked about narcountry.com. This is GNAR country, COUNTRY.com. And then we can also find you on your own site, correct?
Yeah, StephenKotler.com. You want flowresearchcollective.com is the company if you're interested in training with us. And we've turned this peak performance aging training loose on the public. So we just did that like last month. We're starting to bring in our first round of like classes. Well, we've done it obviously with like 500 people, but like actually open to the public. What I am Stephen Kotler on social media.
Okay, perfect. And that is Stephen Kotler, STEVENKOTLER.com. Just to make sure you find the man, Stephen Kotler. Stephen, it's always a joy to have you on Conscious Shift and just to know you and to follow your adventures, to be able to enjoy your writing and really admire and respect the amazing work that you're doing in the world to shed light on, you know, how our humanity can thrive and perform at their peak.
Thank you. It's always fun hanging out.
Absolutely. We will be right back. Just to close out on Conscious Shift, thank you for being here today.
If you love the voices and visionaries shared here on Conscious Shift with Julianne Turner, from spiritual guides like Marianne Williamson, Barbara Marks Hubbard, and Don Miguel Ruiz, to creative sparks like Julia Cameron of The Artist's Way, and inspiring business gurus like Seth Godin and Daniel Pink, Then you'll love being able to grasp their wise guidance and apply their step-by-step wisdom to the new Conscious Shift Notes Action Guide series, a version of Cliff Notes for each Conscious Shift show. With Conscious Shift Notes, they not only give you the engaging full audio interviews from each Conscious Shift visionary and the full written transcript, but now they've also taken each Conscious Shift show interview and distilled it down to its essential essence. So you get each Conscious Shift show summarized on just a few colorful visual pages with bullet points, highlights, and key quotes, so you can grasp the key points at one glance. Want to know the best news? Conscious Shift host Julianne Turner wants you to experience the inspiration of their new Conscious Shift Notes absolutely free for a limited time. With her free gift of their first Conscious Shift Notes, Action Guide, and audio series with Seth Godin, go to ConsciousShiftShow.com to receive your free gift now. In your free gift, Conscious Shift Notes set, multiple New York Times bestselling author and creative visionary Seth Godin shares in detail exactly how you can discover and profit from your own unique genius and start doing what really matters to you and to the world. Your first step is to go to ConsciousShiftShow.com right now to receive your free Conscious Shift Notes, Action Guide, and audio, along with their Conscious Shift Show updates from their growing global community of fellow visionaries. Most important, you'll also get to see how you can access all their Conscious Shift Show wisdom in their brand new Conscious Shift Notes collections around transformational topics they've shared, like prosperity, life purpose, creativity at work, transformational leadership, and many more. In fact, their first Conscious Shift Show Notes collection on prosperity is available now and includes Marianne Williamson on Law of Divine Compensation, Julia Cameron on A Prosperous Heart, Dan Pink on To Sell is Human, and Adam Grant on Give and Take, How True Leadership Starts with a Giving Mindset, and much more. Go to ConsciousShiftShow.com right now to claim your Conscious Shift Notes, Action Guide, and audios to guide you step by step to make your own conscious shift into your true greatness today.
Thanks for being here today on Conscious Shift and listening to Stephen Kotler, the author of NYAR Country. You can find him and the book at narcountry.com. And also just want to let you know that you can follow me and get exposed to your own genius at mygeniusworkshop.com. An amazing exploration into the genius that you already have within you, and we all do. This is Julianne Turner again. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next time on Conscious Shift.
You've been listening to Conscious Shift with your host, Julianne Turner. If you're ready to make your own conscious shift to awaken the power and singular greatness already within you, Julianne is your expert coach and trusted ally, your passionate professional guide to create your highest purpose, profitability, and potential in your life, work, and world. Just go now to Julianne's website, www.creatorsguide.com, and fill in the special pop-up. You'll instantly receive free access to invaluable resources and bonuses that will guide you forward. That's www.creatorsguide.com. Just go there now and fill in the special pop-up. Now is the time to shift into your greatness.